This is the story of a samurai clan that held out for 3 years against one of the most powerful warlords in Japanese history, and what it cost everyone involved when the mountain finally fell. In 1573, Oda Nobunaga brought roughly 30,000 men to the foot of a mountain in northern Omi Province. At the top, behind stone walls built into steep ridges nearly 500 meters above the valley floor, the Azai clan waited. The castle was called Odani, and when it fell, an entire family line ended, a nation shifted course, and a low-born general named Hideyoshi walked away with something no one could have predicted he'd leave with. None of that happened quickly. Let's go back to where it started. To understand why Odani Castle mattered, you have to understand what Japan looked like in the mid-1500s. This was the Sengoku Period, the era of the warring states. For over a century, Japan had been tearing itself apart, with no single authority strong enough to hold the country together. Regional lords called daimyo fought each other constantly for land, resources, and survival, and alliances formed and collapsed within a single generation. Oda Nobunaga came out of this world with a singular drive to unify Japan under his own control, and by the late 1560s, he was well on his way to becoming the dominant military force in the country. But here's the thing about building power in the Sengoku period. You could not do it alone. To secure his flanks while pushing forward, Nobunaga needed reliable allies around him, and the fastest way to cement an alliance in feudal Japan was through marriage. In 1564, he gave his younger sister in marriage to a daimyo from the north of Omi Province. Her name was Oichi. The man she married was Azai Nagamasa, born in 1545, lord of Odani Castle, and head of the Azai clan, a family that had governed northern Omi for 3 generations. On paper, the arrangement made sense for everyone. Nobunaga gained a loyal ally on his northern flank, Nagamasa gained the prestige of a connection to a rising power, and Oichi had very little say in any of it, which was simply the reality of the era. For a few years, the partnership held together through shared interest and mutual need. That changed when Nobunaga made a move that Nagamasa could not follow. Nobunaga set his forces against the Asakura clan, and that decision put Nagamasa in a position with no clean exit. The Azai carried a long-standing relationship with the Asakura, the kind built over years and backed by obligation. To march alongside Nobunaga meant abandoning that relationship entirely, and in the rigid honor culture of samurai Japan, that kind of abandonment left a permanent mark on a lord's reputation. Nagamasa chose loyalty to the Asakura over the marriage alliance with his brother-in-law. That choice had a price. Nobunaga did not absorb the betrayal and move on. In 1570, he moved against Nagamasa with decisive force, and the Azai lost. Defeated in the field, Nagamasa pulled his surviving forces back behind the walls of Odani Castle and prepared for what was coming next. Oichi went with him. So did their daughters. The alliance that Nobunaga had built through his own sister's marriage had been turned against him, and now the man who turned it against him was sitting on a fortified mountain above the valley, waiting to see if Nobunaga would come all the way up after him. He would, but not immediately. Before getting into the siege itself, the physical reality of Odani Castle demands some attention, because the mountain is not incidental to this story. The mountain is half the story. Odani Castle sat on Mount Odani at approximately 495 meters above sea level in what is now Nagahama, Shiga Prefecture. Unlike the flatland fortresses you might picture from Japanese history, this was a mountain castle, a yamazero, built directly into the terrain of 2 parallel ridges running along the mountainside and converging at the peak. The Azai did not build walls and then pick a location. They found the location first and let the ridgelines do most of the defensive work. To attack Odani, an army had to climb steep, narrow terrain with full battle equipment. Under fire, with defenders who could see every approach from high ground. And before reaching the upper fortifications at all, attackers had to pass through the castle town built into the deep valley between those two ridges, which functioned as a first line of resistance. The whole geography was designed to exhaust and expose anyone moving uphill. From the summit on a clear day, the view stretches across Nagahama below, out over the broad surface of Lake Biwa, Japan's largest lake, and all the way to Chikubushima Island, sitting in the middle of the water. A sacred island, visible from a castle built for war. That contrast alone tells you something about this part of Japan. 3 years of that mountain kept Nobunaga at bay, which meant the siege was never going to be won with a single charge up the slope. After the defeat in 1570, the Azai settled into Odani and dug in. Nobunaga, fighting on multiple fronts as every Sengoku warlord did not immediately commit to a full assault on a mountain that could bleed his forces dry. Sieges burned through men, time, and resources, and Odani's terrain made the cost of a direct attack steep in every sense. The strategic logic favored surrounding the castle, cutting off its supply lines and waiting. And that's when the years started to pass. 3 years of the Azai watching Nobunaga's position grow stronger while their own options narrowed. The Asakura, the clan Nagamasa, had sacrificed his alliance with Nobunaga to protect, tried to coordinate relief efforts. In September of 1573, sources describe operations involving both Asakura and Azai forces attempting to move together against Nobunaga's position, but the effort failed. Nobunaga was fighting both clans simultaneously, and he managed to break the Asakura before they could deliver meaningful relief to Odani. With the Asakura gone, Nagamasa had no outside support left. The fortress that had held for 3 years now held only because Nobunaga had not yet decided to finish it. By the autumn of 1573, he made that decision. No relief army was coming. The castle town below the upper walls was vulnerable. And somewhere on that mountain, Azai Nagamasa already knew how this would end. This is where Toyotomi Hideyoshi steps to the front of the story, though in 1573, he was still a rising commander under Nobunaga rather than the figure who would eventually rule Japan. Nobunaga's force for the final campaign numbered approximately 30,000 men, a number that outweighed whatever garrison remained behind Odani's walls after 3 years of siege. But here's the thing about Odani: raw numbers only mattered if you could get those numbers up the mountain effectively, and that is exactly where Hideyoshi's role became decisive. Rather than a straight frontal charge up the slopes, Hideyoshi's forces stealthily climbed the mountain and used the ridgeline's angles to flank and trap the defenders inside. The castle town below was isolated. The upper fortifications were cut off from any retreat, and the defenders found the terrain that had protected them for 3 years suddenly working against them. The geography had not changed. The approach had. What nobody expected, perhaps, was how thoroughly the mountain's own layout could be turned into a trap once an attacker understood its shape well enough. Hideyoshi understood it. With 30,000 men below and no escape route above, the math inside Odani's walls resolved itself quickly. Before the castle fell, Azai Nagamasa entrusted his 3 daughters to Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Sit with that for a moment. Nagamasa handed his own children to the general of the army destroying him, and he did it as a deliberate act of protection rather than surrender. Whatever the fall of Odani meant for the Azai name and the Azai men, the daughters had no part in the politics that brought everyone to this mountain. Entrusting them to Hideyoshi was the best chance Nagamasa had of ensuring they lived past the day the walls came down. Hideyoshi accepted them. Born in 1545, Nagamasa was around 28 years old when the castle fell, and he died by seppuku once defeat became certain. His father, Azai Hisamasa, also died at this point, though accounts vary on the exact circumstances of his end compared to Nagamasa's. Oichi, Nobunaga's sister, was allowed to return to her brother's household. She and her 3 daughters walked out of Odani alive. The Azai clan did not. The fortress that had dominated that valley for 3 generations, built into 2 ridgelines nearly 500 meters above the plain, stood empty. The siege was over, and the mountain went quiet. The 3 daughters of Nagamasa and Oichi were named Chacha, Hatsu, and Go, also known as Oyo. Their lives after Odani Castle became something entirely separate from the defeat that defined their father's end, and in some ways, what they went on to do is the most historically consequential part of this entire story. Chacha, the eldest, eventually took the name yodo-dono and became a concubine of Toyotomi Hideyoshi himself, the same general who had accepted custody of her from her dying father on the day the castle fell. Whether that reads as protection fulfilled or something more troubling depends on your perspective, but the historical record is clear on what happened. Chacha bore Hideyoshi a son, and her name appears again decades later in the final chapters of the Toyotomi story. Hatsu married a lord named Kyogoku Takatsugu, extending the pattern of these daughters moving through political marriages. Go, the youngest, married Tokugawa Hidetada, placing her bloodline at the foundation of the Tokugawa shogunate that would rule Japan for over 250 years. And that's when the full weight of 1573 comes into focus. The daughters of the man whose clan Nobunaga destroyed in that autumn siege ended up woven into the households of the men who shaped everything Japan became afterward. The Azai name died on the mountain. The Azai blood did not. A Japanese government historical source describing the Odani Castle site calls the 1573 siege and the destruction of the Azai family a major turning point in the rise of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. That phrasing understates it, but it points at something real. Hideyoshi came from low social standing, which in the rigid hierarchy of samurai Japan should have kept him far from the top. The Sengoku period had a way of rewarding results regardless of birth, and Nobunaga was known for promoting based on performance rather than pedigree. Hideyoshi took full advantage of that, and Odani was one of the moments where he proved exactly what kind of commander he was. The stealth climb up the mountain, the strategic execution of the flanking assault after 3 years of stalemate, the immediate management of the aftermath including accepting the Azai daughters. All of it demonstrated a kind of composed, opportunistic intelligence that Nobunaga valued in his commanders. But here's the thing about Hideyoshi's career after Odani. Nobunaga eventually died, and when he did, no clear successor emerged through conventional channels. What followed was a competition among surviving commanders, and Hideyoshi won it. Not through inheritance, but through the same approach he had been refining since the day he climbed that mountain in northern Omi Province. Odani was not the end of something for Hideyoshi. For him, it was the beginning. Odani Castle no longer stands as a fortress. What remains on the mountain above Nagahama are earthworks carved into ridgelines, the remnants of stone walls, and the foundations of a place that spent 3 generations as the seat of Azai power, and then 1 autumn as the site of the clan's final collapse. The site draws hikers and history visitors to Nagahama, Shiga Prefecture today, and the hiking circuit through the ruins covers approximately 5 kilometers, taking around 2.5 hours to complete. Walking that circuit gives you a physical sense of what armies faced in 1573. The steep ascent, the narrow ridgelines, the way the terrain channels movement, whether you want it to or not. At the base of the mountain, a Sengoku historical museum documents the Azai family's 3-generation rule, the alliance with the Oda, the break, and the siege. The museum and the ruins together form a complete picture of what the castle once controlled and what it cost to take it. From the 495-meter summit on a clear day, Nagahama spreads out below, and Lake Biwa stretches south to the horizon, with Chikubushima Island visible in the middle of the water. That view has not changed since Nagamasa last looked at it. The mountain absorbed what happened in 1573 and kept standing. 30,000 men against an isolated garrison after 3 years of siege tells you something about the military outcome. But the numbers are not really the point. The siege of Odani Castle was the collision of two kinds of loyalty, and Azai Nagamasa was caught squarely between them. When Nobunaga moved against the Asakura, Nagamasa faced a choice between the alliance sealed by his marriage to Oichi and the older obligation he carried toward the Asakura. Abandoning the Asakura in samurai culture was not a neutral act. It was a permanent stain, the kind that followed a lord's name for generations. Nagamasa chose the older obligation, and that's when the siege clock started. Nobunaga, on his side of the mountain, was not fighting out of personal grievance, though betrayal by a brother-in-law surely sharpened his resolve. He was dismantling, one stronghold at a time, every obstacle between himself and a unified Japan. The Azai controlled a strategically critical position in northern Omi Province, and after 1570, that position became an active problem. The 3-year siege was methodical, not emotional. What emerged from the rubble of all of this, the loyalty, the betrayal, the 3 years, the daughters, the stealth climb up the mountain, was a Japan moving toward the end of the Warring States period. Nobunaga was building it. Hideyoshi, who walked down from Odani in 1573 with 3 little girls in his care, would finish it. The castle fell, the clan ended, and everything kept moving. The premise at the start was straightforward. In 1573, the Azai clan made their last stand at Odani Castle, and they lost. That part of the story takes about 10 seconds to tell. What takes longer to reckon with is everything that radiated outward from that autumn on the mountain. A marriage alliance forged in 1564 produced 3 daughters who outlived the castle, outlived Nobunaga, outlived Hideyoshi, and placed their bloodline inside the Tokugawa shogunate that ran Japan for 250 years. A decision to honor one obligation over another set 3 years of siege into motion. A general who climbed a steep mountain with a small force and flanked an exhausted garrison walked away as one of the most important figures in Japanese history. The ruins of Odani Castle are still on that mountain above Nagahama. The 5-kilometer hiking circuit is still there, the earthworks are still there, and on a clear day from the 495-meter summit, Lake Biwa still stretches south to the horizon with Chikubushima Island sitting in the middle of the water. Same mountain, same view, just the people gone.